Welcome to Ames Public Library for Genealogy Plus, a program brought to you through a partnership with Ames Public Library and the Story County Genealogical Society. I'm Megan, the Adult Services Manager here at Ames Public Library. The library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas, which we do through diverse and inclusive resources and programs. We invite you to future programs that you can learn more about through our current issue of Page One newsletter or by signing up for our events email. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted to Ames Public Library's YouTube channel after the program ends. And for those of you joining us online, we ask that you mute your microphones during the presentation. So please submit any questions you might have via the chat function, which you find a link to at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring the chat and will share any questions you might have with our speaker at the appropriate time. If you get bumped out of the Zoom event today, please just follow that original link to get back to us. You should be able to get right back in. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Paul Lasley.
Well, good morning. This is truly a sweater day, but I thought I should look more summery. Spring is only, according to the groundhog, we're only like, what, 6 more weeks of winter? So at any rate, I said, and don't you already feel warmer by having me up here with a Hawaiian shirt on? Well, it's good to be here. This is not the first time I've been here, but I always enjoy the discussion and the interaction with those of you that are in genealogy. So today I want to talk about listening to your ancestors, and we'll try to be out of here by mid-afternoon, because I know that you've been listening. Recently, I ran across a quote that's somewhat attributed to Ernest Hemingway, but there's some belief that it actually has its roots in China, that says that, and you'll have to look it up, but basically, a paraphrase is, people die twice. People die when their heart stops beating, and they die a second time when people no longer use their name. And I thought about that, and genealogy is keeping people, in remembering people through the study of genealogy. They're not gone. They're not permanently gone. And so I thought that was sort of an interesting, I never really thought about it that way, but they die twice. Once when their heart stops, and the second time when no one ever uses their name again. So I got to thinking about my own biography. I have a lot of ancestors that I don't know their names. Although my wife and I named both of our daughters off of grandmothers so Sarah and Rachel, boy, those are good, solid names, right? So at any rate, I just wanted to have that introduction. Now I got to figure out how to move this thing forward. It will start with the basic question: what is the purpose of genealogy? Well, in some ways, it's so we remember, or we don't forget those that preceded us in previous generations. Many of you are actively engaged in documenting that family lineage. But that's only a small part of knowing that you're 5th generation or 3rd generation. There's some other things that's important. It's understanding our roots. What is a racial and ethnic identity? That's a large part of, when I talk with people about their family history, they'll talk about being from Germany or from Ireland or Switzerland or Sweden. But it's more than actually the race and ethnicity. While that's terribly important, it's really the culture of their ancestors. And so we're going to spend quite a bit of time understanding the culture. Marty is here today. Marty was my support staff person when I was chair of anthropology. So she's heard me talk a lot about the importance of culture when we talk about culture. So we're going to spend a bit of time. And one that I think is so important is preserving that family history in written records. So many of us don't have a written record of our family history. And we'll come back to that because that is an oral history, while very important, sometimes that introduces biases and maybe half truths and sometimes no truth, but it's legendary. So as a sociologist, I've emphasized the social history of our families. So I want to provide a context by which we can begin to understand our roots by understanding the social histories that they faced. So through tracing your family genealogy or history, you learn about not only where they came from, but why they immigrated, or in some cases migrated, what precipitated their moving. Now, I know some of you have documented when your ancestors came to this country. Others of you have documented the migration within the country, maybe from Pennsylvania or Ohio, and came westward as the Iowa frontier was opened up. So you've done a lot of that. What I oftentimes emphasize is what I call the push or pull factors. What were the triggers that caused people to migrate? Historically, many of our ancestors fled Western Europe because the lack of opportunities. And as I've lectured in here before, land was a big magnet that drew a lot of our ancestors to America, the opportunity to acquire land. So just yesterday, I was in a discussion with a person from Pocahontas County, a fifth generation landowner, and he talked about his ancestors settling in Pocahontas County, Iowa, in the 1890s. Well, so I pushed him a little bit, although when it's your doctor, you don't want to push too much. They have a way of extracting pain, but he really didn't know much about why they came. They were from Sweden, and it was the importance of the railroads, especially in northern Iowa in that 1890s. So I gave him a mini preview of today's remarks. So there was the push factor from feudal Europe that closed down opportunities for people to ever own land. Other push factors, those of you who got Irish extraction are familiar with the great migration from Ireland because of the potato famine. In other cases, it was war. In some cases, it was, in fact, religious freedom. Those of you that can trace your religious beliefs back to the Pilgrims and Puritans, early separatists that came to this country, the Day's descendants is the United Church of Christ that traces back to the Pilgrim. So there were push factors and there are pull factors, the attraction, whether it was religious freedom or whether it was the opportunity to own land or simply to get away from oppressive feudal class system. When we get through studying our genealogy, though, we can understand their occupations and their hobbies, their lifestyle, their religious affiliation, their life experiences. That provides a context to better understand your roots. Who were they? I'm always amazed at the number of people that have quite a bit of detail about their lineage, but have a very limited understanding of what were the conditions in 1880 in Germany or 1840 in Ireland that might have triggered mass immigration. So through researching your family, you can gain insights into their culture. Culture is not a word that we use in a everyday language, but when we talk about culture, we're really talking about four things. We're talking about the values that they have. So values are important or lasting beliefs or ideas about what's good or bad, desirable, undesirable. And so when we talk about the context of the culture of our ancestors, to try to identify what were the values that drove our ancestors. How did that influence their lifestyle, family size, religious values, etc.? Second are beliefs. What beliefs did they bring with them? Beliefs are things that we can't prove. In fact, formally we just assume we call them assumed truths. What people believe may not be provable by today's standards, but nevertheless, our beliefs shape who we are, shape where we choose to live, shape our lifestyle. So when we talk about culture, we really want to talk about values and beliefs. We also need to talk about the attitudes. And by attitudes, these are people's proclivities or tendencies to react, whether positive or negatively, to another person, to an idea or a situation. And collectively, attitudes and values and beliefs that are fundamental to understanding culture shape our behavior. And so what I want to emphasize as you document your family lineage, be attuned, and I'm going to give you some examples, but be attuned to what was the prevailing culture where they came from at the time. What were the prevailing mores or folkways or values or beliefs that caused people to pick up and move? And I've always been fascinated. Now, I've never moved. Well, unless you consider moving from Missouri to Iowa, but that's it. So, and my migration was simply because there was a job at Iowa State University. I knew it was cold here. I didn't know how damn cold it was, but over 40 years I've learned, and I'm now sort of been adopted by the state of Iowa. But I've oftentimes thought the stories of people leaving their families and maybe never to see their families again as they migrated to the new world. Those are deep-seated commitments, aren't they? In fact, a lot of our ancestors couldn't afford to come, so they sold themselves as either indentured servants or had a sponsor that they agreed to work so many years in order to pay the passage across the Atlantic. Those are big decisions. Those are life. Maybe only once in a lifetime do you make those decisions. As I've read westward migration in wagon trains before the railroads, how people sacrificed to make that migration, that's making a commitment that many of us, at least I've never had to make that. I mean, I always knew I could move to Iowa, and if I didn't like it, I could move somewhere else. I didn't have to go in too much debt because I rented a U-Haul trailer, but that's of a much different magnitude than saying goodbye to your family and going across the ocean, maybe never see them again. So, moving a little more contemporary, and in fact, I brought a copy of the book and I'll send it around. In 2004, the Iowa Farm Business Association thought it would be nice if some of us would sit down and record a bit about Iowa's rural legacy, called the subtitle Recollections and Commentary. And I'll start this around. This is my copy. And I just bring it as an example of the sort of literature that may be out there that might help inform, and of course, most of this is 20th century, but it might inform how the culture that your ancestors grew up in, or in some cases, the culture that I grew up in. So what focus of today will be, what are the values, beliefs, and behaviors that your ancestors have passed along to you? Now, I taught at Iowa State for 40 years, and so this was an exercise that I always enjoyed doing, especially with undergraduate students, to get them to understand the importance of culture and how it may have shaped who they are. Because we learn our values and beliefs and attitudes through formal education, going to school. We learn new ideas, new values. Sometimes they challenge us through what I now am calling houses of worship, so that I'm more inclusive, formation of values and beliefs through houses of worship or churches. But most importantly, we learn a lot about our values and beliefs through families and friends who we associate with. So trying to get students to understand what I call the intergenerational transmission that are passed along through stories, adages, maxims, homespun wisdom, and sayings. And that's why we have the title today, Listening to Your Ancestors. So I used this exercise to get my students a taste of the important influence of values and beliefs that they've picked up. Another example that I use, and I find myself doing it yet today, is when I pick up a new baby. I find myself thinking, what will be their future? Because right now, as I'm holding them, awkwardly holding them, what are their values, beliefs, attitudes? Well, they have none. We didn't either. But they're going to pick up. Those are acquired through parents and schools and churches. And I can't help but think, what will this child become? How will we imprint this child? Whether it's my own grandchildren or the neighbor's kids. Of course, Lynette and I live in Northcrest, so we don't get to see babies very often. But at church and other places, when people let me hold their baby, which is not near as common as it used to be, but they come into this world as a blank slate, and they acquire as they grow into adulthood, they will acquire values, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that we've taught them. And I'll come back to that point shortly. So I engage my students in having them think about adages or proverbs, or what might be known as well-known sayings that have been passed down through the generations. Oftentimes, these adages express, in some cases, universal truths. In some cases, proverbs use images of home and family to offer advice or lessons. And so we're going to do a little exercise. So I've got some cards here. I hope all of you have pencils. I want you to take just a couple of minutes to relax and think back to your childhood and listen to the voice of your parents. What, what advice, what maxims, what homespun wisdom about how to live or the importance of work or how to treat others or why to save money or why to go to school, and jot them down. I have my students, so I have a whole collection. I'll see how you guys do with against my students. But what sayings might your parents or grandparents, now in my case, my grandparents were represented a generation out of the Great Depression, and they had thank you, they had a big influence on my upbringing. So we'll take just a couple of minutes for you to jot down an adage or saying or maxim that your parents might have told you. My dad was very famous for saying, "Get your hands out of your pockets." I got a lot. What's it mean? Get your hands out of your pockets? Get busy. Do something. Don't just stand there with your hands in your pockets. Help me. Yeah. So we'll take just a couple of minutes and we'll come back to this. It looks like most people are done. For those that are on Zoom, I hope that you've scratched out some adages that your parents might have uh, uh, instilled in you. So what what adages or maxims did you write down? And I'm not afraid to draft people either. Marty.
Dad always said, save 25% of the gross amount from each time you get paid, and you'll save enough to not have to work in retirement. And then when you get to $5,000, put it in a CD. And then he reminded me, farmers get paid twice a year, when they sell grain and when they sell livestock.
Yes, yes. So put 25%. And the value he was instilling in you was what?
Well, for me, I'm a tightwad.
Yeah.
But, it's like, you need to save your own money. You need to be responsible for yourself and others, but it was, if you come from a bunch of kids, you weren't gonna be coming to your parents every time you were fiscally irresponsible.
Yeah. Yeah. The importance of thrift and savings comes through so much. Who else? Who else has got one they want to share? Yes, Mary.
My dad taught me the trip back home always seems shorter than the trip to the destination.
Yes. Isn't that the case? I wonder why that is. But it's an observation. The trip is, when you're going somewhere, it seems longer than the trip home. Yeah. Good, good. What else? Yes.
Religion was important in our home.
Mhm.
And so we always went to church, and that was instilled in me yet today.
Yes. Yeah. The ritual, the routine.
Oh, you might repeat it for the people online.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, folks at home. If you'd have got up early enough, you could have been here in person like these people. So we had one on, so Marty said, her dad's advice was save 25%, but, a gross amount. Mary said her advice that she got is a trip somewhere is always longer than the trip back. And Pete just said the importance of church, a routine of going to church. And that's certainly something that has changed in recent years. And what else? Lee, I seen you scratching a lot. I don't know whether you're just making a lunch list or
Anyway, this is more of a funny
yeah.
situation. My mother, who grew up in West Central Illinois, little dinky town called Fountain Green, which if there was 50 people, I'd be surprised. This was in the early 1900s. And I heard her once say that I didn't realize that there were any other people than Republicans and Presbyterians until I was in the 4th grade.
Yeah. Okay, so that for those on Zoom, Mother said she did not know there was anything other than Presbyterian
Republicans and Presbyterians
until in the 4th grade. Yeah. Yes.
They were so insulated that
Yes. Okay. Others that'd like to share?
My mom, I guess my dad too, nobody owes you a living.
Nobody owes you a living. Yes. Yeah. And again, that emphasizes work, doesn't it? Nobody owes you a living. You've got to get skills. You need a job. Yes. Good. Thank you. Others? Yes, Carol.
I had a grandfather that told me I lost an uncle when he was young and I was very young. Kind of my first experience with death.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me, sat down beside me and he said that we need to grieve for those we lose, but that we need to move forward for the loved ones that remain behind.
Oh, yeah.
It really gave me an easy way, because then I ended up losing my mother early too. So it just gave a real good way to, and we told that to our kids too,
You passed it down. Yes. That we grieve for those that we lost and celebrate or move forward for those that we love. Yeah, good. Yeah, they're still here. Yeah.
I think in Iowa, we tend to, all of our participations around the school activities.
Yes, and the importance of school.
Other states, it's not so much around the school, but our school is central to our community in a small
Yeah.
community. The gates and the proms and the all the activities at the school are kind of the same.
Historically, schools, because of the creation of the country schools, the importance of public education, one township in one section in each township across Iowa was set aside for public education. We know those as the country schools, and those provided a centering for the neighborhood in the township. And yeah. Yeah. Good. Others?
Joan online said that her parents told her to get a good education because they lacked that opportunity themselves.
Great. Get a good education. And boy, probably many of us have been hammered on that. My grandmother always said, get an education and then do what you want, but they can never take your education away from you. And that was sort of in the they'd lost a farm in the Depression. They lost it was taken away from them. The bank took it. And so she always, her advice was get an education. They can never take that away from you. And of course, having been enrolled for 11 years in undergraduate and graduate school, I think my grandmother was beginning to think, I didn't plan for you to make that a lifestyle, others.
My dad also said, don't wish your life away.
Don't wish your life away. Yeah. And that's something like, get your hands out of your pockets. Do something. Well, don't sit there like a bump on a log. Well, let me show you some that I've collected over the years, and some of them are recounted in that book I sent around, that will trigger other thoughts about advice that we have gotten from our ancestors. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Some of these are going to fall by the wayside as children don't have ties to farming in rural life. Even a blind pig or a squirrel will eventually find an acorn. This is really about reflecting luck. Even a blind pig will find an acorn. One that's attributed to Ben Franklin, early to bed, early to rise, will make a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. How many of you heard that growing up? Yeah, everybody. A penny saved is a penny earned. This goes back, Marty, to your dad. Savings. A lot of advice came through our ancestors about the importance of. Now, we talked a little bit about affiliation. Oftentimes you're judged by the company you keep. Birds of feather flock together. Frequently used in raising children. If you hang out with thugs, whether you are or not, you're going to get a reputation of being a thug. One for the library. Don't judge a book by its cover. These are folk wisdom. Don't judge a book by its cover. Read it. One to my grandmother. There were 5 of us boys, and I have one sister, so there's 6 of us kids. My grandmother was instrumental in our upbringing. She used this one a lot. An idle mind is the devil's workshop. How many of you have heard that one? Thrift, industry, being busy. Don't be a bump on a log. Get your hands out of your pocket. Do something. Idleness was not viewed favorably in many. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. As a department chair, I was oftentimes accused of rushing in foolishly. Some others that my students have shared. Experience is the best teacher. It ought to be, for it's the most expensive. The school of hard knocks sometimes is referred to the school of hard knocks. Back to money. a fool and his money is soon parted. That's oftentimes been attributed to P.T. Barnum. I'm not sure that's true. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. That one has to be careful who you follow. One that I hear frequently, it's a hard road to hoe. And sometimes we use that to describe a person or a family or a situation that circumstances has not been good for them. It's a hard road to hoe. Reflecting agrarian gardening. Lynette always gives me the hardest road to hoe when we're weeding. An apple never falls far from the tree. I hear that from time to time, or sometimes it's the fruit never falls far from the tree. He's too big for his britches. One that is common. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. So when, again, caution. Now, this next one I just picked up this summer. Keep your nose to the grindstone. Now, how many of you have ever heard that? Yeah. I always thought that meant keep focused, keep your nose to the grindstone. Don't take your eye off of the needle or off of the dial. But Lynette and I were in a grist mill in northeast Iowa when we were up around Elkader. And the tour guide said, the saying, keep your nose to the grindstone, came out of the milling industry as you fed grain into these grist mills. You keep your nose close to the grindstone was you could smell when you were overfeeding the grate and it would burn. And so you wanted to keep your nose close to the grindstone so that you could tell if you needed to throttle back the inflow of grain so that it wouldn't burn. It makes a lot of sense, and he was convinced that's where it came from. I always thought it was simply one of keeping focus and working, but he explained that keep your nose to the grindstone came out of the milling industry. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Harry Truman used that a lot. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And then Harry would always say, but if you do, for heaven's sakes, don't drop the basket. And I thought, given the price of eggs today, that's very appropriate. Take the bull by the horns. Many of you have heard that. Jump in, get it done. Take the bull by the horn. Take initiative. I think, oops. One of my students shared with me that I like, an empty wagon makes the most noise, that his parents had always told him that. And I thought, yeah, there's a certain, rattling wagon, a loaded wagon, something with substance loaded would not make near as much noise as the clanging, rattling of an empty wagon. Life is simpler when you plow around the stump. Again, keep focused on where you're plowing. When you wallow with pigs, expect to get dirty. And that comes in a variety of forms. I sanitized this. So don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Oh, you're preaching to the choir. Don't count the chicks until the eggs are hatched. These are messages from the past. Good fences makes good neighbors. I've heard that in many circles in agriculture. A rooster one day and a feather duster the next. And you get people talking about their childhood, the grandma would go out and kill a chicken and pluck it for the same morning for Sunday lunch. Two wrongs don't make it right. There are so many adages and maxims that are really values and beliefs and attitudes that we've learned from our parents and grandparents. These adages or proverbs give us a glimpse into the intergenerational transmission of the values and beliefs that our ancestors held. One of the reasons that I'm trying to record these is that I'm not sure they're going to resonate with future generations. That many of them are based on a culture that is slowly leaving us. So I don't know whether there'll be adages and proverbs based on Star Wars or Lady Gaga or the entertainment industry today. So what were they trying to tell us? And you can look at the and try to discern, well, what was the value or belief? Maybe it was the uncertainty of life. Maybe it was the value of work, the value of savings, of thrift, being open-minded. Now, I think one of the reasons that there are so many adages that exist is because many of our ancestors were illiterate or had very limited education. So the family histories were oftentimes oral, not written down. Perhaps an analogy is churches and cathedrals were adorned with stained glasses and paintings that told the Bible stories to illiterate folks. Likewise, adages or folk wisdom helped pass along important values to those that couldn't read and write. So now I'm bringing back, I'm watching the time, how this helps you learn about your roots. In many cases, because there's not a written record, but there are many sources of records that can assist you in describing the living conditions of previous generations. I note, and I suspect many of you have already picked this up, how effective Professor Henry Gates Jr. is in blending the personal narratives of his guest with historical facts and conditions in his program, Finding the Roots. He might not be able to say, this was the conditions that your ancestor experienced, but overall, here were the conditions that existed. So he brings historical facts and narratives together in helping his guest on his show, Finding Your Roots, contextualize the living conditions. Since I have an Irish background, the book that I oftentimes go to is a book called Angela's Ashes. For those of you who have Irish, that really describes living conditions in 1820, 1840 Ireland. Now, through church records and photographs and history books of the time, Professor Gates is able to describe living conditions in general. And that may be the best we can do in helping understand what decisions to move or to migrate. So blending of that family lineage with historical archival records can supplement and provide a social history of our ancestors. In kind of summation, the importance of studying history, and I keep coming back to that, in terms of providing context and understanding of living as well as working conditions, issues of family size, occupation, class divisions that perhaps give you some sense of your family lineage. In my case, poor people, they were blacksmiths. every generation that I've been able to look at in my family were blacksmiths, including my dad. And as a little boy, we had a forge. And then Lee, you certainly will know, in the old days, you didn't replace plowshares. You took them to the blacksmith and were pounded sharp. And my dad had a forge that his dad had, and I think his dad before him had. And my job as a little boy was to stand beside this hot forge and turn very slowly the blower, a hand crank blower. And I remember how I really disliked people that would bring in a truckload of plowshares to be sharpened. Nowadays, we simply replace the shears and go on. But in those days, you pounded them out, which you heated them up on a forge and then pounded them out on an anvil. Those are the kind of stories that provide a bit of context about how our ancestors made a living. One of the things that I've done over the years, many of us have ties to agriculture, but many of us came from families that combined farming with something else. That farming did not provide a steady, stable income. And so you find a lot of farm families that were carpenters or blacksmiths or wheelwrights or worked in town or worked in a feed store to help level out the fluctuation in farm income. Decisions to migrate likewise played roles, and we've talked about the push and pull factors. So I want to sort of close with the importance of historical museums and libraries. Even though there may not be a record of your family, museums and libraries can provide an understanding of the context and understanding the importance of your family roots. History books and historical archives can help you place your ancestors. I know that they migrated from southern Germany in 1880. What were the conditions that existed in Germany at the time? And then what were the conditions that existed in the United States? So the Ames History Museum, and I know a number of you in this room are involved, the Ames Public Library, our local library, are treasures in Story County. We oftentimes don't realize how important the History Museum and the library are to providing a cultural context to understand our ancestors. I know the librarians here and the staff at the History Museum can help you in documenting, especially those of you that are long-term residents in Story County. So with that, we've got a few minutes, I think, left for open discussion, dialogue, etc. Yes, sir. Clear in the back.
I'm going to bring you a microphone real quick.
Well, thank you. Do you think it's possible sometimes that adages lead us astray?
Lead us astray? Oh, I'm sure that's the case. That, yeah, they were folk wisdom that may have been appropriate at the time, but I think it still tells us something about our values and beliefs. And quite frankly, sometimes they were uneducated, illiterate people trying to pass along the best knowledge they had, but sometimes they passed along values that we find today repugnant. Exclusiveness. So Lee, I'll just pick on your mother for just a moment. Until she got out in a wider world, she thought everybody was a Republican or a Presbyterian. So very narrow, and that's very common. And so the whole issue of education and experience in the world oftentimes is maybe to broaden our perspective and maybe find that the advice that we were given maybe wasn't. So good point. Thank you. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up or? Okay. You think I'm right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yes, good. Yes,
I'm gonna argue with you just a little bit
Okay.
here.
oh, good, I like that.
Okay, good. Um, you're doing pretty good. And then you got to the point of saying that people were illiterate, and I kind of raised my eyebrows because I knew a lot of people, and as everyone here does, that maybe they were illiterate in some ways or didn't perform like they should have in some ways, but in other areas, they were very smart. I'm thinking back to my grandpa or my dad. They made things like you were talking about, going to the blacksmith shop or whatever and going, oh man, I wouldn't have thought of that. I mean, even today, I'm going, even though I have an education, it's some of the things they did were beyond me.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say because they couldn't read and write that they weren't smart. Many of them were very entrepreneurial and had skills, and we still see that. One of the things that I've just been fascinated with is the rebuilding of Notre Dame Cathedral. And if you've not seen the documentary, I am just amazed at how people that had never studied physics or really didn't understand scientific building, how they built. Now, they recreated that using old style craftsmen. But if you look at the joints, if you look at the carpentry skills, the wood carving, the stone masonry, but many of those people, those original builders, were peasants. They were people that never gone to school, but they had skills. So we don't argue about that. They were, my granddad came out of a family that were barn builders in North Missouri. And as a little boy, he would use a carpenter square and try to show me how you could appropriately cut rafters. Now, my granddad had a 6th grade education, and it still befuddles me. And I have a PhD, I've since long forgot. But yes, just because they lacked formal education didn't mean that they were dumb. They were oftentimes very smart. So good point, Pete. Thank you. Yeah, Lee.
Pete, maybe you're searching for the term street smart.
Oh,
or learning in the school of hard knocks.
yeah.
And those are a couple of other adages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. Yeah, the school of hard knocks. And many of those trades were passed on. If you can find what an occupation of one generation is, oftentimes you will find that they learned those skills either from their parent or their dad, or maybe their mother, and some homemaking skills. And we don't want to minimize those, because farm women, rural women were very entrepreneurial and creative in how they canned and preserved meat and vegetables and fruit. But most of those skills were passed down from mother to daughter or from father to son. So if you can find an occupation, now in some cases, it may have been an uncle or a neighbor that was very skilled, because these are trade skills that were learned sort of on the job. There wasn't technical schools on how to cut angles in lumber or how to do carving. So that also provides a context and understanding of the intergenerational transmission of occupations. And you still see it in farming today. I don't know what percent, but it's very high. Those that are farming today, their parents and grandparents were farmers. Yeah.
Gary online suggests that you visit Matt Edel's blacksmith shop in Haverhill, Iowa.
Oh, yes, yes, I've heard good things about that. I had an ancestor that was a wheelwright. That, and he traveled around northern Missouri and southern Iowa in a covered wagon with a blacksmith shop in essentially in his wagon. And all he did, I'm told, was he repaired wagon wheels. So in the days when with wooden spokes and wagon wheels, farmers would bust a spoke and he would sort of make a tour. And Billy Titus and one of my younger brothers has the workbench that was in this wagon that because you had to know how to bend not only wood but also metal and replace these spokes and hubs. And as a little boy, I would go out to the shop, my grandpa's shop, where he'd put all these tools, and I enjoyed. First of all, had big vices on both ends, and that was always fun to spin the vices, and crack walnuts in them. But all these little pegs that some were handmade on how you bent. You'd steam wood and bend it, or heat up iron on a forge. And so that's still in the family. That's one of the things I need. Where did he learn how to build a wagon wheel? You look at the geometry and the skills of building something relatively simple by today's technological standards. I don't know that there's anybody in central Iowa that could build a wagon wheel. Now, perhaps the Amish in southern Iowa might. At any rate, that's an occupation, a transmission. So, yeah. Other comment? Any more online? Okay, they froze up. Well, I see it's almost 11 o'clock, but I want to thank you all for coming out on such a cold day. I enjoy visiting with genealogists. Yeah, so thank you so much.